Hello and welcome back. My name is Brandon Minnick. I'm your host here on 8 Bits. Thanks so much for joining us. And this week we have a very special guest host, Christopher Harrison. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for letting me come back and co-host again. I guess I didn't do too bad of a job when I was here a few weeks ago with Chloe when you were on vacation.
That's right. Yeah, I was out touring amazing national parks and monuments a couple weeks ago. We were out checking the Grand Canyon, Monument Valley, Bryce Canyon, Zion. We did all the things, and now this week it's Chloe's turn to take a vacation. So mu- much appreciate you coming on the show. How have you been?
Actually pretty good. Like speaking of vacation, I took last week off, went down to Las Vegas with my wife, celebrated her birthday and our anniversary, and it was wonderful to be out and really to experience a little bit of life again. That it was a real nice taste of normal after the last 14, 15 months. And it was so
Yeah,
good for the soul. It was so good for the soul.
I hear that. Yeah, we were in Arizona heading up to the Grand Canyon when the CDC came out with the new recommendations for the mask mandates, and
Right.
all of a sudden, I mean, my wife and I were both fully vaccinated, which is why we felt comfortable doing this trip. But yeah, it was like all of a sudden everything felt really normal. So here's hoping to a great summer. But I do want to share some. Well, it's exciting news, but I can't really share the news yet. But for folks that listen to and join us here in the live stream for the show, they know I've been working a lot on something called the Xamarin Community Toolkit, and I also am very passionate about Xamarin stuff. Used to work at Xamarin, and with this new thing called .NET MAUI coming, which is the evolution of Xamarin, we've been having a lot of internal conversations about what are we doing with the Xamarin Community Toolkit, because we got to make sure it works for .NET MAUI. So I'll say for now, stay tuned. There's an announcement coming. It's all good news. You're in good hands. And if you don't like it, you can blame me. But we've got no, we've got all good things coming up. So if you, for example, want to continue using the toolkit on .NET MAUI, we got you covered. If you want to take advantage of the new .NET MAUI performance stuff with maybe a new toolkit, we'll have you covered. But stay tuned. We'll make an official announcement soon.
And if you don't like it, send
Christopher,
all of your mail to Brandon Minnick, California, United States of America.
that's right. You can find me on Twitter at the Code Traveler. Nice things only, please. But yeah, Christopher, we have an amazing guest today. But I want to make sure we get any announcements in that you have as well before we bring him on and talk about his amazing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So my big announcement is on June 30th, we're going to be launching a new video series for Vue, which of course is a front end JavaScript framework, and really excited about that. We've got Jen Looper and Chris Noring and myself all on video and presenting all of that out there, and it's there to support the learning path that currently exists on Microsoft Learn for Vue.js. So that's going to be on June 30th that the video series will launch. Definitely keep an eye out for that, or just my Twitter handle. There we go. Right there. You can hit me up on Twitter, and I'll of course be advertising that. And if you're curious about the learning path, which is still out there, hit me up on that. And a little bit later, we're also going to have a bit on Django as well, which I'm really excited about. I j'adore Django. It's such a fantastic framework. So
I love it.
yeah.
Couple teasers for the fans of 8 Bits. You heard it here first. And for anybody listening on the podcast, Christopher's Twitter handle is at Geek Trainer. So I assume you train a lot of geeks. geeks like me.
Yes. Yeah, that before joining Microsoft, I was a full-time tech trainer, and that Twitter handle happened to be available, which still to this day boggles my mind that nobody else had snatched that. So yeah, thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. Rob says the Python for beginners was terrific. Thank you. I appreciate that. So yeah, we're trying to keep that style with both the Vue and the Django. So hopefully you'll enjoy that as well.
I'm excited. Keep us posted. Happy to announce it on 8bits once it's live as well.
Yeah,
Well,
we'll definitely do
with
that.
without further ado, we have an amazing guest this week. He's been one of my favorite people to work with since joining Microsoft, and he has such an incredible story that don't want to delay anymore. Let's bring him into the show. Welcome, Cecil Phillip. Welcome to
Hey,
the
everybody.
show.
Thanks for having me. What's going on?
Yeah, so excited you could join us this week. So I've known you for a couple years. I know you work
Mhm.
at Microsoft, but for folks who haven't met you before, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. So, like you said, Brandon, Brandon, you and I and Christopher are on the same team now, technically. So, I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. I've been in this role for about 3 years. Well, a little bit more than 3 years. I think July 27th, to be precise, is going to make 4 years
Wow.
here in the company, like doing in the same role, doing the same job. Um, yeah, I'm a .NET guy. Like I spent my entire career doing .NET between, web forms and MVC, and back in the day when we used to do jQuery and Knockout JS and all those types of things, up to now where we're talking about like Docker and microservices and stuff. But it's always been .NET in some way or the other. And then also, along the way, I've kind of got into the world of teaching a little bit, right? And that's been a fun part of my journey as well too. And maybe we'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. But I know no developer comes up being like, oh, I want to be a teacher. Like that's a normal thing that we do after we get our engineering degrees, right? Like I want to go teach people to do stuff. But yeah, I spent some time doing that, and I've done some podcasts and some video shows and things of that nature. And now here I am with you folks having a good time, doing some live streaming.
That's right. And so yeah, let's go all the way back. Let's do the Cecil Phillip origin story because I know
Sure.
you live in Florida now, you work at Microsoft now,
I
but
do.
how did you get there? How'd you get started in the world of tech?
You were born
Sure.
at
So
a
let's
young age. As time went on, you got older.
right. Yeah, let's go let's like dig into the time machine, right? And like go all the way back. So I was born in an island called Antigua, right? So Antigua, for those that don't know, it's in the Caribbean. It's a very small country. It's precisely 108 square miles. So for perspective, that if you take Florida and you drop it in Florida, like if you take Antigua and drop it in the bottom of Florida, it's probably smaller than Miami. You know, um, it'll take you about 2 hours to go around the perimeter of the country, right? So again, for perspective of how big of a place that we're talking about. But I was born and raised in Antigua. Went to elementary school, high school there. I stayed there until I left. Come up to the United States for college. Um, I think one of the things that was always interesting about Antigua, and folks always ask, "Oh, how did you become like a computer person?" It's always an interesting story because we never had computers growing up per se. I wasn't in one of those societies where, you know, we didn't have computers in schools, we didn't have computers in the household. Um, and we're talking about like the late 90s going into 2000s, right? Well, like I'm in high school and I'm trying to figure out who I am as a person, right? Like I'm trying to do some self-discovery kind of thing. And your parents, as Caribbean parents, they're very strict, right? When it comes to like education. You know what I mean? Like education and success and having a plan, right? Um, and they're like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to study? And so my dad was a doctor, or is a doctor, I guess you could say. He's retired now, but my dad was a doctor. And, for between me and my sister, he was always like, oh, well, you guys are going to get older and you're going to come take over the family business. And so when you go to school, you need to study biology and chemistry and stuff, right? Physics and whatever the case is. Well, it turns out I didn't do that. And I ended up doing, in school. And we can talk a little bit about how the Caribbean education is a little bit different to the American education system. But when I went to school, I ended up studying business, accounting, and math, right? Like those are the subjects I wanted to do because those are the things I gravitated to. And then somewhere along the line, like I ended up taking like a computer class. Now, our computer class was interesting because our computer class didn't actually have a computer, right? There was a book that spoke about computers, but there was no physical computer per se for me to actually like, which is interesting. You know, it's kind of like for us, it was kind of like every other science subject. You know, like you talk about science, we talk about biology. You know what I mean? But like, I've never dissected an animal. You know what I mean? Or I've never done any of these things. But we talk about like, you know, bones and skeletons and the structure of biology. Just in the same way we spoke about like, you know, processors and screens and keyboards, like the structure of a machine. Like I never really had one to play with.
I had a programming class where the instructor tried to teach a little bit like that, you know, like you learn a language. And so he was insistent that you could do this without a computer, that if you just like wrote out your code with pen and paper, that was somehow going to teach you to program.
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's just cruel and unusual punishment. You know
Yes.
Right? It almost reminds me of
like, why would we do this?
Yeah, it almost reminds me of doing whiteboard interviews where it's like, how do you write code at this company? Do you do it on the whiteboard or do you do it on a computer and a tool like Visual Studio? Because maybe we should do the interview using Visual Studio then.
Yeah.
Just a thought.
Like I hated those whiteboarding tests too, because my handwriting is horrible. So like, why would I want to come to an interview and do one of the things that I'm absolutely horrible at and feel confident that I'm going to do well in this interview? Anyway, that's another story. We can talk about that later too. So anyway, so that was my educational experience from that perspective. Again, like we learned about stuff, but like I didn't actually physically have one. And you know, along the lines at home, like I used to watch my dad. He used to come home and he used to bring work home a lot. And bringing work home meant like he had to do reports. Like he typed up reports and doctor things, whatever it is that he did with those. And
I think that's the official term, doctor things.
Yeah, we just call them doctor things, whatever it is that they're typing. I didn't understand the jargon, so I'm just gonna say doctor things. And so I grew up watching my dad with like various typewriters throughout the years, like typing up reports and you know stuff for people. And one year, I think it might have been like 2 years before like I left the country to come to college. He brought a computer home, right? And again, like I said, like we didn't have computers in school. It was very uncommon for your friend to have a computer in the house. But for my father, it was like, hey, I spent a lot of time writing reports. This is like my new report writing machine. Like that was the intent and purpose of it at the time. So he brings his machine home. It's a compact Presario. If folks remember compact, yeah, COMPAQ, right?
That's
compact
right,
Presario, right, with a Q. And you know, it was a tower computer, you know. And that's when you bought a computer and it came with everything, right? It comes with the keyboard and the mouse and the monitor and like, you know, not like today, like you got to buy them separately, right? But like it came with everything. And along with it, it came with a collection of books, which again, I don't think anyone does that today. Like you don't buy a laptop and it comes with like reference material. You know what I mean? Like that's not a thing right now.
Not that I know of.
Right. So anyway, so you got this. And also we had like that 56K modem, right? The thing that goes right, and like you connect to like through the phone line to the internet. Like that's how long ago we're talking about. And oh yeah, the turbo button. Yeah, I think we had a turbo button on the machine too. So you could be right. There might have been a turbo.
I never understood that.
I don't know what it did. It made the computer make noise, but I don't know if it actually got any faster or not.
It goes to 11.
There we go. We're going a little faster. So anyway,
if anybody knows what the turbo button does, let us know in the comments.
Yeah, definitely.
I never figured it out.
Yeah, I have no idea what the thing did. So anyway, so the report writing machine is in the house. And at the time it came up, I didn't really care about it too much. It was just like, oh, okay, this is like a work thing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to go watch cartoons. And so one summer, you know, again, I'm home, I'm bored, and I decided, hey, let me go play with this computer thing, right? And it started off with just us like playing solitaire. So again, we're talking like Windows 95, just before Windows 98. You know, I mean, I wasn't into like computer games and stuff like that at the time yet. I'm just like learning like what this machine is. And so, I mean, what does everyone do with a computer, right? You play solitaire and Minesweeper for like hours and hours and hours, like clicking around and like just understanding the mechanics of how the thing moves and works, right? And somehow I ended up like reading those books that came along with the machine. And in those books, there were manuals about like Windows, obviously, like, what's the start button and what's, the terminal and what's Windows Explorer, like, those types of things. And also there's one on Netscape Navigator, which was, again, like the big internet browser at the time, right? So this is a while ago. And so I'm reading about Netscape Navigator and what's a web browser and what's the internet. And, I think AOL and Yahoo.com were like the two big things, right? Like back in the day. And a part of it spoke about like HTML. So what is HTML? I don't think it spoke about JavaScript yet, but it was just like HTML. And then I think that's when you could still put styling, like there's no style sheet. Like you put the style in the tag kind of thing, right? So you say like font color bold equal true or whatever the case is, right? Like on the tag versus like on some CSS property. So anyway, so I'm reading the book. I'm like, hey, let me go ahead and, I'm not doing anything. I'm bored during the summer. I'm going to try and, go through this book and try some stuff out. So I try it out. And again, the simplest thing that you could probably ever do with a web browser, right? Like I put my name on the screen, big bold letters centered right in the middle of the browser. Right?
Hold on, wait. You centered text?
It was
I didn't
centered.
realize that was possible.
You know what? That might have just been the default or whatever the browser, text center, whatever. And it was centered, right? It's silly, right? Because today as developers, like we look at that stuff and it's just like, oh, it's whatever. But in that moment, for again, this person that I didn't have a computer before, I'm playing Minesweeper, like that's my extent of my computer knowledge, right? And now my name's on the screen. I'm like, oh, I have mastered the machine. Like this is mine, right? Like I own this, Like my name is on the box.
I'm envisioning you as Tom Hanks in Castaway, going, "I have made fire."
Yes, exactly. Like that is exactly one of those moments where, again, in retrospect, is a very trivial thing to do, but in my mind, this is like I've just discovered the world, right? Like this is the most amazing thing ever. And so I call my friends on my phone. Again, it's those rotary phones. Like you turn your phone and it goes click, click, click. I call my friends and I'm like, yo, you need to come over because I just put my name on this computer thing. Like it's the amazing, most coolest thing ever. I'm like, if you come over, I'll put your name on the computer too. Like that was the conversation I was having at the time. So again, way too excited about putting some text like on a black or white background. You know what I mean? So anyway, so that happened, and over the summer I just continued playing with it, right? Like, I added a button, just tried to play with different colors, try to put different. I created a paragraph and not just not just the word, right? Like just playing around and trying to understand how this thing worked. And I think between then and the few years that kind of went by prior to me leaving the country and actually coming to university, I would always just like ask my parents for stuff. So my uncles and aunts and stuff, like they would leave the country and they'd go to Florida and New York and other places. And so I'd ask them to bring me more books, right? So I think I remember him. I think my dad, he went to Florida and I told him, hey, I want to learn how to like use this thing. And so he bought me a C++ book. And I think it was Borland C++ something, like whatever that thing was. And so he brought me the book, but I'm like, I couldn't use it because Borland was expensive, right? So I had the book. Yeah, I had the book, but I couldn't do the thing. You know what I mean? Like I couldn't do anything with it. I could just read it. So again, just like my class in school, right? Like I had nothing to do. I could just look at it. I couldn't do anything with it, really. But I read the book because I was interested. I was curious about it, and obviously over time, I started like playing games on the computer. I think NBA Live or whatever the case is had come out, like NBA, like one of those EA Sports games, one of those basketball games. But that's when like you had to actually put the CD in and install it in DOS. I don't know if you remember those. Yeah. You had to do that before. Before there was like a click run. There was a go into DOS CD / something install, and you had to like run a boot script of some sort for you to install the game on the CD. Right. This is before
is this like Windows 3.1?
No, this is Windows 95, 98. This is before auto-run CDs. This is before auto-run CD. You know what I mean? Now we have auto-run CDs. You put in the CD and it just does the thing.
Yeah, because
or what's a CD?
Yeah, because like Windows 95, there was still a lot of things that you had to do directly in DOS. Like it wasn't like that pure shell that Windows 3.1 was over
Yeah.
DOS, but like Windows 95, it was still like this little blend, and there was still a lot that you had to do through DOS that you still couldn't do through the UI. I distinctly remember those days. Yeah.
Yeah. So you still had to. There was like some manual interaction, right, that you had to
Yeah.
do.
Right.
So I think between me playing video games and Minesweeper and reading these books, like I eventually became like the computer person of the house, right? Because I mean, no one else in the house was going into DOS to do anything. You know what I mean? But here I was because I really wanted to play this video game, right? And so I had to figure out how to get the thing to work. Um, so again, like doing all these little things, and I just became pretty comfortable doing that type of stuff. And then, there was the whole phase of Napster where now I'm downloading music and, I'm doing stuff, right? Like, and I had
He
to go online
downloaded
and figure it out.
Napster music legally. We're just gonna pretend like that
Yes,
was
yes,
yeah
yes.
for
So,
yeah the MPAA that's listening here. It was all legal. It was all public domain music.
sure, it was
Yeah.
all non-copyright, Creative Commons
Yes,
back in the day.
yes, yeah.
But what happened was because we're on a 56K modem back in the day, what would happen is that I would set like a single song, I would set it to download like the night before. I'd go to bed and wake up and see if it was done. Right. So I'd have to wait like at least 8 hours to like download a song. Right. And if folks remember,
Yeah.
when you were on dial-up and anyone called the house, like your internet cut out, so you had to do that again, right? Like this is a long time ago. So anyway, like so that was kind of like me being in the computer space, right? Like I kind of just got comfortable navigating and doing things with it and being in there. And eventually I was just like, well, why don't I just do this for a living? Because it feels like a very comfortable thing to do. And also at the time, there really weren't a lot of folks in Antigua that were doing things with the computer, right? I think whenever I graduated to get into college, there were like maybe 3 or 4 shops, quote unquote, I'll call them shops, of people that would fix computers. Like you can go in and it's like you go to a mechanic, right? You take your car into the mechanic, they fix the thing. There are a few like computer mechanics that I could go to whenever, I don't know, the printer wasn't working or the file, something was corrupt or I needed more RAM or whatever the case is. And so in my head, I'm like, okay, well, this is what computer people do, right? Like they fix machines and they give it to other people. For some reason, like software never was in the back of my mind. Like it never crossed my mind that could be a thing that I could do, right? I was like, I'm going to fix the machine and give it back, because when you think about like the environment you grow up in, like you usually, pull your inspiration from that environment, right? Like there were no programmers around me, so I didn't pull that inspiration from anyone in that context. So anyway, I get to college, university, and now I'm doing like intro to algorithms and data structures. I'm doing Java, I'm doing C++, I'm doing assembly language, I'm doing all of these things. And, in addition to like just the cultural immersion socially that I got from leaving the country, there's also the professional cultural immersion, I suppose, because now like I could see I could do more stuff, right? Like I didn't have to fix computers and printers for a living, right? Like there's a little bit more available for me from that perspective. And then you do the career fair days and things of that nature, and you see all these companies that are coming to hire college kids, and I'm like, wait, EA Sports is here, Microsoft is here, IBM at the time was here, HP, Hewlett Packard, like all of these people, like Netflix, a very, very, very early version of Netflix came to our college at that point.
Wow.
And
which college is this?
This is Florida Tech. This is in Melbourne. This was years ago. And
I used to live in
Melbourne,
Melbourne. That's
Florida.
right.
Yeah, Melbourne, Florida. Not Melbourne, Australia. I didn't go that far away.
Right. Well, that's Melbourne. We're talking about Melbourne.
You got to add the accent.
As Aaron would quickly correct us.
Exactly. So again, like just seeing that like was so important for me, because like being academic is one thing, but then being able to see what you could do with it is a different thing. And that's kind of where you derive like your motivation and your inspiration from, at least for me anyway. So I was like, oh, well, I don't have to go home and fix computers. I could work for a company that does software. You know what I mean? I could do more. I could start my own software company. I could teach people how to do these things. Like there's so many different ideas kind of just started like formulating in the back of my head about what was possible. but I think along with the inspiration, like there were highs and lows to it as well, right? Because some of the lows of that were, hey, I just came to this country. I'm not from here. Um, a lot of these people that I went to school with already did programming in high school. I'm just picking this stuff up like right now. So I already felt like I was behind the curve, like way, like years behind. You know what I mean? Like I'm trying to catch up to where these folks are. Um, and then on top of that too, like, there, yeah, as an international student, right? Like I had to go through the process of getting a student visa and then making sure my student visa was always valid. Making sure I got a H-1B visa whenever I graduated so I could still work. I had to get an S-1B visa. Like there were things that had to happen in addition to like doing the work and being like a professional computer person. You know what I
So
mean?
like
Right.
all the visas.
I mean, you had to, right? And I think that's one thing that maybe employers would notice, but for your coworkers, that they may or may not know, like, and again, assuming that we got here legally, you know what I mean? You may not know all of the things that have to happen for an international person to be here. So when you think about it, you have to realize that one, these people have to, these people probably worked a lot harder than you did. Not just from an academic perspective, but just in terms of putting in effort through legal fees and paperwork and like having to maintain a certain level of status to stay here. Else,
Yeah.
like as an example, like if I don't get a job, like when I left college, if I didn't get a job in like 6 to 9 months, like I had to go. Like I can't stay here and hang out. You know what I mean? Like I can't take like a gap year. You know what I mean? Like some people do. They kind of just not go to school for a year and hang out. Like I have to go. You know what I mean? And so again, just always thinking about like, and then also to, coming from the Caribbean to the United States, like the currency, it's not exactly the same. So, my parents are spending a lot of money for me to come to school here. I have to put in a lot of work to stay here. Again, going through the lawyers and dealing with all this types of stuff. And still I have schoolwork to do. I gotta pass my classes, right? I gotta do stuff. And it's work, it's effort, right? And again, eventually it worked out and here we are. But
So I'm curious, Cecil.
yeah.
For folks watching, we get thousands of views, and there's a good possibility somebody is maybe in Antigua right now wondering,
Yeah.
how can I do that too? How do you get started with that? Either college application process, visa process, or which one comes first?
For me, it was very much like it's like rolling dice, right? Like you never kind of know where you're gonna land, and I mean that very seriously because, again, I didn't live here, so I didn't do like a college tour. You know what I mean? Like I didn't travel to schools and visit departments and see people. You know what I mean? I was lucky that again my uncles and some family members would leave Antigua and come back, and they'd bring back, I think it was called U.S. colleges, and those thick books that had like listings of colleges and universities. Kind of like the phone book of universities or whatever. And like they would bring those books home for me, and I'd have to spend time and I'd scroll through those books, right? Sometimes 2-3 books at like 1,500 pages, right? Because it's every college and university. It's all of their courses. It's how many credits they are, student loans and deadlines. Like it's a very, very thick book. And so I had to think about, well, where do I want to live, right? And I'm like, I don't know, because I don't live in the United States. I'm not going to be like, oh, I want to go live in Arizona. I don't know anything about Arizona. You know what I mean? I want to go and live in North Carolina. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, how do I pick? How am I supposed to know? Assuming that I haven't done that before. Now, some people have, but for me, I haven't been to these places, so I couldn't really make an intelligent decision. So the approach that I took was, well, I do have some family members that live outside of the United States. I'm going to pick colleges where my family lives. So I had family that lived in Virginia. I had family in New York. I had family in Canada. I had family in Florida. I'm like, so that sounds like a good start. Like, let's start there, and then we'll kind of like start whittling down what you want to do. Now I'm looking through these books now, and now I got to decide, well, what am I going to study, right? I know I want to do computers, right? But like, what does that mean? Like, there's computer science, there's computer engineering, there's management information systems, there's information technology. And it turns out that every school teaches those classes very differently. So now, like, how do you pick, right? So now I'm going through these books. I'm looking at, like, I'm going down to the level of reading course descriptions to be like, would I want to do this course or not? Would I want to, like, do I want to do, I think, what was it, like UI with Java? Do I want to do that, or do I want to do hardware software integration? I think today we'll call that IoT, but back in the day it was like hardware software integration with like assembly language. Do I want to do that? I don't know. So
Right.
I'm curious about the timing. Were you able to like do all that research online, or were you talking about like having to flip through like physical course catalogs?
yeah, there was no
and
online.
do your research?
I
That
want to say
way.
there was no online. We had the internet, but
Right.
I had a book. Like, I had a thick book,
Yep.
or multiples of thick books that I was scrolling through these books and trying to figure out, where I was going to go. And, in that time, again, we're talking about like late 1998, 99 at this time. Because, you got to apply like a year and a half before, right? So, at this point, I'm looking through these books. These are all black and white books, right? I don't know what this place looks like, right? They have pictures of campuses and things of that nature, but for me, like, they all look the same. They're all black and white, so it's whatever.
Sure. And even pictures, like, I'm sure you've stayed at a hotel
Yeah.
that had great pictures, and then you get there, and you're like, "Oh, this is the
they're
pool."
they're all grayscale. It's like, okay, that pool water could be green and purple. Like, I don't know, right? Like, it's whatever.
And of course, what Cecil didn't know at the time is that all the campuses were actually just grayscale. Color wasn't there yet.
Exactly. So the process for me was, again, luckily enough, like, I had some family members that lived outside of the country. They sent me these college books, and I flipped through them, right? I flipped through them, and I picked some schools where I think were close enough to my family, and I sent applications to those places. Now, and obviously, I had to do my SATs. You could do your SATs in the Caribbean, at least then.
Same
and
SAT
then,
as we do in the US.
Same SATs, yeah. We just,
very cool.
We have specific testing centers that did that, right? So you couldn't go to every school and do it. I think today, like, you just do it in your school or whatever. Like, I had to go to like specific places, like testing facilities, to do that, right? And so I did my SATs, got a pretty good score. I did it a second time. I got a even better score. I'm like, oh, okay. I want to, like, can I just keep taking this and keep getting better scores? But anyway, it turns out that, from the grades I had before, I got accepted to 2 schools without even sending my SATs, right? So I'd sent in my college application, but I sent them in before I had gotten in my scores, right? And that was because the deadline was approaching, but at the time that we were taking the exam, like, that would be, excuse me, that would have been past the deadline, right? So anyway, so I sent my SAT scores after I've already got accepted to college, which is funny. So I think that was more so just like, how many credits are you going to get? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how many transfer credits, or how many, scholarship
AP classes,
money,
or
yeah, AP classes, scholarship grants and things of that nature. That was a separate conversation. So I sent in my stuff, got in, and now what I got to pick? Well, I got accepted to Virginia Tech, Florida
It's a
Tech,
good school.
and I got accepted to FSU. Right now, I'm trying to decide, well, which, again, I haven't been to these places, so I don't know the difference, right? Probably if I grew up in the United States, I might have watched, like, I don't know, NCAA basketball or seen the news or something like that. I would have learned about, like, college reputation. Like, that's a thing people know about because
Oh, yeah.
you live in the
Yeah.
country. I didn't know anything about that. Like, I just, eeny, meeny,
Hey,
miny, mo, right? We're going to pick one, right? Let's see
Yeah.
what happens.
FSU is playing for the softball title tonight. If they beat Oklahoma, they take the softball title tonight.
See,
There you go.
But then,
And-
see, and that's stuff you see on television. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, about that stuff. It's like news to you. For me, it's
Yeah.
just like, I don't know these people. like what is this?
Right. And even like for me, growing up in Orlando, I kind of have a similar story where, like, I love computers. I was the computer guy. And so when it came time to choose a college, I just looked around and said, like, what are the best engineering colleges? And at least at the time, hopefully it's still true, University of Florida was the top in the state. So I applied to University of Florida. That was the only application I submitted to any college, and they accepted me. So I went. But just wanted to get a subtle jab in there. Good choice not choosing FSU. Just kidding.
Sure. But so I'll tell you, the one reason why I ended up going to Florida Tech was because I liked their computer science program the most. And then also, at the time they had the highest international student population in the United States.
Mhm.
Um, and I mean, that sounds like that might be a big number, but at the time it was at like 12%, 12% international students. I don't know what it is today. It might be more or
Oh,
less, but
it
at that
well,
point, that was the highest in the United States. So I was like, okay, well, there's
ironically,
a lot of international people there. I want to go.
yeah. I used to live in Melbourne, and I used to coach the FIT, the Florida Tech water polo team,
Oh yeah,
and
okay,
yeah, the team was almost exclusively international students.
yeah,
So that the percentage of international students at FIT is or Florida Tech has gone up dramatically.
yeah. It probably has. But that for me was like the deciding factor after I've gotten my acceptance letters, right? Like it was, hey, I like the curriculum because again, remember I was going through all of these course descriptions and stuff like that. I like the curriculum, I like the subject matter, but I also really like the fact that there's a lot of international folks going there. But not only international folks, there were a lot of Caribbean people that went there. So again, for me, if I'm gonna go, like, and I don't know anything about this place, like, let me go where the territory is going to be a little bit more familiar, right? Because again, that's important because you're going away from home, right? Like, I'm not going to the college down the street or, you know, at the other side of the island, right? Like, I'm going to another country. You know what I mean? Like, let me at least walk in slowly to a place that's a little bit comfortable, and that kind of makes sense. So anyway, so now I'm here. I'm in Florida Tech, and it's weird because while I was in college, no one believed that I was a computer science major, which is weird, right? They're like, "Oh, Cecil, you don't, you're not like," and I don't mean to offend anybody, but I'm just gonna tell you what they told me, right? They're like, "You don't wear glasses and watch anime and drink soda and pizza, and you come out to parties and hang out." And I'm like, I mean, it's balance, right? Like we're all not the same. And I think it's a conversation we have a lot today with, which is like, what does a computer professional look like? You know what I mean? And so for me, very early on, I'm just like, this is just how I've always been. Like, I like playing basketball. I like sports, but I like computers too. It's okay to like more than one thing. It's not a problem. You know what I mean?
I got that a ton when I was doing full time tech training is the number of students who had come up to me or the number of admins at whatever training center I was at and would just be blown away by the fact that, oh, wait, hold on, you mean you're technical but you're so outgoing and you like have a personality, like, yeah, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. It's it, it's
Absolutely.
it was very weird. I never really understood that. Um, but again, also to remember, like, my context is different. Like, I'm coming from another place, and I'm just like, do do computer people do something different that I'm supposed to be doing that I'm not? Like, am I missing something? Like, I already know that I didn't do it in high school like a lot of other folks did. So in my head, I'm always thinking I'm missing something. Like, there's something that like I haven't done, that like I haven't gotten like the rite of passage to be in this place. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Yeah.
After a while, I just realized it was just silly stereotypes, and it's whatever. Um, I can tell you another thing for me in college was, um, so before I went to college, like, I didn't meet a lot of different type of people that don't look like what I look like. You know, um, right now I think there's a big conversation in the United States about like diversity and inclusion and um, just like respect of other people. Um, I grew up in a society where like everyone was the same. Like, I had black teachers, I had black friends, I had, like, everyone was the same. You know what I mean? It was a Christian society, right? Like everything was the same. And so now I want to say Christian, like, it's Catholics and Methodists and Baptists and like those, like that was the culture of the island. And now I come to the United States and I'm meeting people from Egypt and Africa and Australia and France, and I'm like, we don't have any of those. You know what I mean? Like, I've never met folks from these places and these cultures. I've never met Muslim people before. I've never met Jewish people before until I left the country and I came here. And I think, in addition to just one, learning more about the perspective of what I could do technically, again, it was also learning like the different perspectives of people as general, right? Like, so it was learning on both sides, both professionally and personally. You know what I mean? Like, college was a huge exposure for me, just understanding like what was possible. You know what I mean? And I know everyone doesn't have like the ability to go or the finances to go, whatever the case is. But for me, it was about, what, regardless of whether it was school or whatever the case is, it was about like leaving your comfort zone and being in a place that would kind of immerse you around different types of people and different types of experiences. And it's almost like going to like very uncomfortable situations, right? And learning to kind of like adapt to those, not hostile situations, but again, just places that you're just not usually at, you know what I mean? And kind of deal with that. Um,
Yeah. And so I'm curious. So I'm going to selfishly take a minute to plug your podcast away from the keyboard.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Anybody listening should go to awayfromthekeyboard.com, subscribe. It's a great listen. And the reason I bring it up is what you're just talking about, Cecil, with different folks who not only look different but have different backgrounds or sound different.
Yeah.
Seems to be the kind of the running theme on the podcast. Is this life experience what inspired you to host this show?
Um, I think life experience turned it into what it is today. Where it initially started was, so we used to, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, right? We actually used to meet together at user groups and used to meet in person and have sessions and stuff like that.
I don't remember any of that.
I know that was like a lifetime ago, man. That's like at least 5 JavaScript frameworks ago, right? Like we don't remember that. And we one of the things that we always wanted to do was like, since these meetups were, you know, once a month kind of thing, like how do we connect with people for the other 3 weeks of the month, right? So like, oh hey, let's do a podcast and kind of like continue the conversation that we would have started at the end of the meetup. Because at the end of a meetup when the session's done, everyone wants to hang out and there's questions, and then a little bit of networking happens, and like community building happens. Like before and after the meetup is when like the community is kind of built. But anyway, as we were doing the podcast, and I'm in South Florida, so it was mainly like South Florida conversations we were having with different companies, and how are you using .NET, and what kind of startup are you? We didn't call them startups back then, but what kind of new business do you have now, and whatever. And eventually, like, we realized, hey, look, there are people from outside of Florida that are listening to our podcast too. We didn't think about that. Like, that wasn't never the target audience. We didn't like go out and seek them, but they found the show and they liked it. So now we're like, okay, well, how could we expand the subject matter to include people from different places? You know what I mean? And so we could have totally just been like, we don't care, whatever. We're just gonna keep it South Florida. We're just gonna keep it Miami. We're just gonna keep it Fort Lauderdale. But I think once you recognize that people are giving you your time, I think it was almost like our duty to like give those people like a moment. You know what I mean? Like again, like I've never been to Africa, or at least at the time. You know what I mean? But we have people from Africa listening to the podcast. Maybe we should get a guest that's been from South Africa, right? I'd never been to the UK, or again, I haven't done a lot of things, right? Like maybe we should find some other people within tech that do these things, because now as more people listen to the show, I want them to find someone or something or some topic that they could kind of connect to and be like, oh, okay, every episode is not about me, but like this particular one, like I feel this person, like emotionally, like I attach to what they're talking about. And I kind of felt like it was our duty to kind of tell that story. Another thing too, what you'll notice as, even with like the conversation we're having right now, you know what I mean? Like we haven't said anything about technology. Like I haven't said compiler, preprocessor directive, da da da. Like we haven't spoken about it, right? But what we're doing is we're looking at like the people behind the code, right? Like the people behind the software that we build. And I think a lot of the times we forget that perspective. You know what I mean? A lot of the times we see a thing and we're like, oh, damn you, company X. Your thing doesn't do the thing I wanted to do. And then we have a lot of choice words for those people, but then we forget that they're people, right? And we forget that, we're all under the same pandemic. We forget that, some people have lost loved ones and some people have lost their jobs. We forget context, right? We forget that we're still people at the end of the day. And I think shows like our podcast and even what we're doing here right now, it's always good to show the other side of the keyboard. You know what I mean? Like Like, who are the people that are doing these things? What are they building? Like, what do they feel like? What are some of the struggles that they've gone through? Because you can imagine there are thousands, millions of people that are writing software every day. You know what I mean? Like, what's the probability that someone that's written some software that you're using had a bad day? You know what I mean? Like, what's the probability that, something messed up happened to them? You know what I mean? You don't know, right? And it's kind of like when people are online and they're complaining, oh, well, you brought up this feature, but you didn't do this one, and you did this and you didn't do this one. And I'm just like, really, dude? Like,
Yeah,
people, it's always like a what have you done for me lately versus a, hey, like I should really appreciate these people's time and effort. And, again, remember that we're talking about
it's
people. We're not talking about like machines that are writing the code themselves.
right. Yeah, it was I empathize deeply, having been on both sides of that. And yeah, I had that realization a couple years ago myself, where um, every time somebody creates, or every time there's a new tool, a new website, a new podcast, something new in the world, somebody created that, and somebody
Yeah.
put time and effort into it. And I think it's right. And I realized it's important that we remember that first before necessarily criticizing it, because it's so easy to read a blog post and be like, oh, this is terrible. There's typos everywhere, or they called it this instead of this. How could they? But yeah,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, somebody took the time out of their busy day to write that blog post. They're not making any money off it. They're not looking for fame. They just wanted to share their experiences. And I think if we first take that moment to appreciate that content, then I think we can give some better feedback rather than worst blog post ever. How could anybody read this? Just
Sure.
because there's a person behind it.
Yeah, I think for me, so kind of like going back to the question Christopher asked me. For me, it's very similar to my experience going to college, right? Like, I didn't know certain things until I got there, and now I'm meeting these different people, and now I have a different perspective about what it means to communicate with them, what their culture is like, what things may or may not be deemed respectful or disrespectful. Again, you don't know what you don't know, but then you don't know if you don't make the effort to know, right? And so it's the same thing with us, right? Like, as we tell the stories of computer science and of computing in general, I kind of look at shows like this, like the historical record of what we've done, right? Because who's writing the history books for us? You know what I mean? Like, who's the computer historian, right? And it's us, technically, in a kind of backward way, right? It's these podcasts that we do, is these shows that we do, these videos that we create, these blog posts that we write, that at some point you think about it 10, 25 years from now, whenever, someone's going to look back and be like, oh, well, this is how we used to write code, and this is how we used to do videos, and this is how we used to do podcasts and conversations. And assuming that, like, the world hasn't gone crashing to hell, um we can look back at a historical data and be like, oh wow, like things were different or better or worse or whatever. Because if we look back, probably a lot of the things that happened like might have been lost to, I don't know, like environmental damage, and I lost the disc, and you know what I mean, like stuff happened, right? And we don't have history for everything. And so I think all this data that we're generating now, this is just going to become, like someone at some point is going to sit down and curate all this stuff that we've created over this past 2-3 decades, and be like, well, this is the history of computing over the early parts of the 2000s, right? And this is what it looked like, and this is what, this is where we came from, and and this is where we're going to go, right?
Well said. Yeah, I wonder about that myself, because we are constantly generating or creating things, but it all lives in the cloud or ones and zeros. And I'm curious how that will survive, or if it will survive. Like, you were talking about installing software or installing games on your computer using a CD. That was only 20 years ago, and now I don't even own a CD player. And so, yeah,
Right.
if all that information was saved on the CD, well, what good is it if we don't have a way to read the medium? So, like, yeah, I'm always curious, and none of us will be around to know the answer. But yeah, 1,000 years from now, will we still have like the old GeoCities websites cached somewhere in the Internet
Yeah.
Archive?
I mean,
I don't know.
it's funny because I mean certainly there's a lot of things that have been lost to the ether over time, but there's still a lot of things that do exist out there. You know, the Space Jam, the original Space Jam website being like a fantastic example of that, or Bob Loblaw. What is the name of his website? But
Blah
he
blah
was
blah's blah blog.
Yes.
Did I get it?
Yes, exactly. But he was a Y2K denier, saying that it wasn't going to be that big of a thing, and so he put out a website about this, and it apparently like still exists in that exact same state that it did from his last update of like February or something like that of the year 2020. So some of those things do still exist out there. So to
Yeah.
like Cecil's point, it's going to be really interesting, and to your point as well, Brandon, it's going to be really interesting to sort of see 20 years from now when everybody starts going back and looking at those things, like what the interpretation of that is going to wind up being.
Right.
Yeah,
And
for sure. Like I
none
look
of us
at
will know.
no, exactly. I look at my family, like generations of my family, and like I kind of started talking about like how my dad reports on a typewriter. You know what I mean? And then I went to college. I wrote reports on a laptop. You know what I mean? And now my 8-year-old son talks to like the air, right? And some device in the house is going to listen to him and does the thing, right? So where I had to like use, my dad walked to libraries. I had Britannica or whatever and Carta on a CD.
Yeah.
Now my son stays at home and he talks to the air, and like the speakers in the house are like, "Oh, I'll find the answer for you. I know what that is." You know what I mean? So there's just a kind of again, and this we're only talking 3 generations, right? We're not talking about hundreds of years, but you can see how technology has kind of evolved over that space. And one, like we're very much more connected, but then two, there's just so much more that's possible within that space. So again, I don't have a teenager. My son's not 20 years old in college yet, so I can only imagine when he has to write reports, like what is that going to look like at that point? You know what I mean? And what does it look like for his grandkids? And sometimes I wonder, is he going to even own a car, or are they just going to like our cars just going to drive us and we're not going to drive them anymore? Like, what is it really going to
I
look
hope
like?
so.
I just
So,
want my flying car. That's all that I want. I just want my flying car.
see,
So
we can all get like jetpacks or something.
So, Cecil, I'd be remiss because we've been having some awesome chats in the comments about stereotypes. We even talked about it for a bit, where what do software engineers look like?
Mhm.
And in the thumbnail for the show, you're holding this really cool medal. Uh, what
Yeah.
is that? And explain a little bit more about
Sure.
your hobbies as
Just my
a
little memo.
software
So
engineer on the side.
yeah, I'll hold this up
What do
too.
we do?
So so kind of like I mentioned earlier, like like whenever I went to college, there was always you're not a software person. Like I don't believe you. Like up until the point that I'm graduating and I'm walking across the stage, and like we don't believe you. Like I need to hear them call your name because I don't believe you, right? But I'm like, okay, whatever. So I grew up in Antigua, and I was always a fairly like active person. Like I used to swim for Antigua. Like regionally speaking, like I used to do a lot of swimming, and basketball was a thing that I did. And after I graduated, I was like, I need something to do, right? I need, I'm not on a team anymore, and getting into sports in the United States is a little bit more complicated, particularly if you want to play in college and stuff. Like you can't just like, hey, I'm coming and show up, because that's what we did at home. We just showed up. Here, you got to sign paperwork, and stuff has to happen, right? So anyway, I started getting into like weightlifting a little bit when I started working. Like nothing, not like super heavy weights, just like lean fitness, I guess. And I saw an ad on like like Hulu or one of those things. I saw an ad about like these obstacle course races. So I started looking them up on YouTube, and then I think like Spartan and CrossFit was like just starting. Like it wasn't super popular yet, but it was just like a thing that people were doing. And I was like, oh hey, I don't like running. Like I honestly hate running. But there's very few races that's just swimming. You know what I mean? Particularly like this is a big continent, right? Like versus like I could walk to the beach from my house in Antigua. You know what I mean? Like so, me getting to the beach is a little bit different. Um, so I'm like, this is a big place. Like, what do people do? And so I saw these obstacle course races, and I'm like, okay, I don't like running, but like this is like a little bit of everything. Like, there's some climbing, there's lifting, there's swinging on bars and carrying rocks, and I'm like, that sounds like fun. Let's do that. And before COVID, I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years before COVID, I started doing like obstacle course races. So I did Warrior Dash was my first race. I did that maybe like 3 times before
It's
I
a
did any other race.
fun event.
Yeah, Warrior Dash was a lot of fun. So it was Warrior Dash South Florida. They don't come down here anymore, but they used to. I think the closest one to me now would be Orlando. But before, they used to come all the way down to Fort Lauderdale, Miami. I did that. I did Mud Factor. Like so, this medal that I have here that I'm holding up is from Mud Factor. I don't know if you can see that, but that's what it says. This is a Mud Factor race. Mud Factor is kind of short. It's like a 5K with obstacles kind of thing. So not super long in comparison to the other one. I've done Spartan race. Spartan is interesting because they have 3 different versions. I think there's like a 5, a 8, and a 13 mile version, or some iteration of that. Like there's 3 different lengths that you could do, with obviously varying levels of like obstacles and things of that nature. Um, so I did 2 of them, and I was trying to get the trifecta. So the trifecta is when you do all 3 of them. And what happens is that when you do Spartan, my Spartan races, my Spartan medals are in the other room. But when you do Spartan, like you don't get the whole medal, you get like a fraction, right? So I had like the top piece and like the side piece, and I needed like one more part. And the one more part was like the 13-mile one. I'm just like, do I really want to do this? Like, do I really want to do 13 miles of obstacles? But again, COVID happened, and then I haven't done it. So, but the thing
Boy,
with Spartans, you have to do them
that's a good
all in the same
excuse.
year. You can't like do it. I can't do 2018, 2019, 2020. I got to do all 3 races the same year. So I don't think I'm going to do it this year because things are still pretty locked down. But maybe next year I'll get the 3 of them and see how that goes.
That's right. We'll start training now. Well, Cecil, we only have a minute left. Thanks again so much for coming on.
So quick.
It flew by. But for folks listening, where can they find you online? We know your podcast, awayfromthekeyboard.com.
Yeah, so definitely check out my podcast, awayfromthekeyboard.com. And again, the whole purpose of that show is for us to just have conversations with folks in technology about not technology. So, you'll hear a lot of random conversations about comic books and woodworking and having children and starting businesses and, but they're all from folks in technology. So again, like kind of just like peeling the veil behind and showing you the people behind like the stuff. Another thing that I do, and I could see if I could find a link. I'll put this in a private chat. So I do a show called the On.net Show. So this is a pretty fun show that I've been doing for about 3 years. We do a live version of the show. We do a pre-recorded version of the show. And we also have like what we call little highlight videos. But it's all around .NET stuff. So, .NET web applications, .NET, new C# things, new Blazor things, Visual Studio things. If you're interested in learning about .NET, we have something for everybody, whether you're senior or a little bit newer in the space. So that's pretty cool. And another thing that I do that's public that folks could take a look at, I'll share this inside of the chat too really quickly. So me and my other coworker, Brian Clark, we do a show called Pi Weekly Live. Actually did it just before I got on here, like before I signed into this stream. That's exactly what we're doing. But with Pi Weekly Live, what we do is, we take 2 folks that aren't Python professional people. So again, I'm a .NET person. Brian is more of a JavaScript person. And then we both get together and we learn Python, which has been really fun. So we've been looking at building a lot of cool things with Python. We've been exploring different Python web frameworks. We looked through Flask and Django and Fast API, Bottle, Tornado. Again, like all the cool Python things, we've kind of just been exploring those. How do you work with databases with Python? How do you call web APIs with Python? How do you build bots with Python? Again, kind of just, messing around and exploring a lot of things. Another thing too, you'll notice about that stream, like Brian and I love to go on tangents. So again, I'm warning you because when you come to the show and we don't do code top to bottom, don't get mad. Like we like to go on tangents because well, again, because it's about people at the end of the day, and I think it's important that we have the conversation. And sometimes we have new folks that come in and they're like, "Oh, okay, how do you do priority planning? Like, how do you determine like what we're gonna do first, right? Or stuff like, oh, how do you like what's type hinting in Python? And then we gotta, we go on a little bit of a tangent, or what's Docker, or how do I install like the VS Code thing or whatever? And then we kind of go on tangents, and we want to make sure that whoever comes to the show understands what it is by the time that they leave. So I know that might be frustrating for some of the more advanced folks. Sorry, but again, we definitely want to make sure that people are comfortable and understand. Hey, even though you might be coming from a perspective of I'm a new developer, or maybe you're super duper C++ person and you want to learn Python, like we want to make sure that everyone understands what's happening.
Love it. Well, so
hinting in Python is amazing.
Yeah, Python is an awesome language right now.
Yeah, so we are out of time, but Cecil, thank you so much. Thanks so much for tuning into 8-Bits this week. Do make sure to check out Cecil's podcast, awayfromthekeyboard.com. You can see him on the on.net show on Channel 9. And also you can catch him on Twitch doing Pi Weekly. Cecil, thank you so much. Christopher, thank you as well for coming on as the guest host. And we will see you next week.